how do we get our students to feel confident singing, but beyond that, to enjoy doing it? That's really what we're going to be diving in today's episode of That Music Podcast.
You're listening to That Music Podcast with Bryson, the curriculum designer and educational consultant behind That Music Teacher and the Elementary Music Summit. Each week, Bryson and his guests will dive into the reality of being an elementary music teacher and how music can truly be transformative in the lives of the students you serve. Show notes and resources mentioned in this episode can be found at thatmusicteacher.com.
Welcome back to That Music Podcast. Today, you might not notice anything different at all, but if you are used to watching our video podcast over on YouTube, you likely won't see me right now. We are having, for whatever reason, so many random things going on with our technical issues. So we're just going old school and just doing an audio podcast. And if you're listening on an audio podcast platform, you might not even have known that we do video podcasts. So in that case, check our backlog over on YouTube. We'll put the link in the episode description so you can join us that way if you would like. This month's podcast topic is kind of more centered around ensemble singing. Kind of when we were brainstorming ideas, we really came down to, I have a new sixth grade choir, which I know I've talked about in the past and in previous episodes, but we're not going to specifically only talk about in a choral setting. But we are going to be talking just increasing singer competence in general. I truly believe, and I believe that this is not something that many people would disagree with me on, but I could be wrong. The easiest way to increase singer confidence is to get them singing more earlier. I know that this is a problem that I've really noticed since COVID, when we weren't able to sing for so long, that it's really made it really evident of who was not able to sing in the early elementary years, and who was, because I now have these kids that, typically would have spent many years singing with me, but because of all the COVID restrictions, they lost a couple of years. And I wasn't really able to get them back to where they normally would be. With that being said, I do feel like I have done the best that I could, like many of us, when we were dealing with all the COVID craziness and the aftermath of that. But what can we do other than just getting them singing early? Because this is also something I hear a lot when I'm talking to new teachers, because they're like, all right, I just came into this school situation. I have these fifth graders that the previous teacher, they just didn't sing. So I'm now going in as this new person trying to get these fifth graders to sing when they really don't have much experience. What do I do? And that's really where the frustration comes in, because yes, the earlier they're singing, and you can keep them singing, that is always going to be easiest. But in practicality, that's not necessarily going to be the case. It's just not going to be an option sometimes. So what do we do with that? And that's kind of where I'm more going to focus on today, because I think we can all understand that when we get our young singers singing, it tends to be a little easier, especially when you're doing things like using singing games or, puppets or other things to kind of take the focus away from the fact that they're singing. That can be a great way to just get them singing earlier and more often. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about how we can get singers to feel confident singing, whether that be in a general music setting, an ensemble setting, or whatever you have in your teaching position. The biggest thing, I've done a lot of thinking about the things that I've done in my classroom to instill singer confidence. And I think the biggest thing that I've done is to just model being a confident singer. And not only just modeling being confident, but modeling making mistakes. My voice cracks. I make make a big deal out of it. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was a little silly. Let's move on. Is it okay to make mistakes? Yes, awesome. And just kind of model that humility and that understanding of, hey, you're gonna make mistakes, and so will I. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong. That's part of the process. That's part of, making mistakes, And so for my choir students, I always tell them, this is again this is nothing that's like uniquely something I say, but I say, I would much rather you make a mistake, but make it loud and proud than for you to sing timidly or quiet or feel like you're worried that if you put yourself out there, you're going to make a mistake and it's going to be embarrassing. So this is another one of those opportunities where it is really obvious when you look at it that classroom management and classroom culture really are at the root of so much of what we do, because it allows them to understand that confidence is not always just means you always do it right. Confidence is understanding that when you do it wrong or if you make a mistake, that's okay. And that comes from a lot of modeling. That comes from sometimes flat out saying it. And it also means that we as teachers need to hold the classroom culture to that. So if someone starts laughing at somebody else singing or something like that, we need to shut it down, and we need to show what it really means to put yourself out there, and really means to sing confidently and to understand that mistakes are part of the game. As I've mentioned previously, one of my favorite ways to get singers to sing is to kind of trick them into doing it, for lack of better words. And I think this even works for upper elementary as well. For instance, I've already mentioned in early elementary, using things like puppets or, singing games and things like that can be a great way to get them to not worry about the process of singing. Middle schoolers, upper elementary, they tend to be a little bit more aware of the situation. But I found that in those situations, you can typically not necessarily trick it or hide it from them, but kind of dangle the carrot of, hey, I have this really cool game that we can't play unless we're singing. And in these cases, I usually, instead of teaching the game or teaching the song and then the game, I flip it. I actually teach them the game. And then the first few times around, I'm the only one singing. So they're kind of getting in their ear. But eventually I'm like, all right, I would love to keep this game going. But now it's your turn to take some of the reins and do some singing with us. And bonus points for when the games can be some sort of competition based, especially physical activity. That's something that I found is really, really successful in my classrooms at my 5th and 6th grade school. So I'm thinking things where they're able to move around and jump around and maybe have a winner and a loser sometimes. These are really great ways to get them to sing, but also enjoy the game through it. I originally learned this song from Joan Littman, and then have since learned it again from Aileen Miracle, as well as Megan McDonnell. But it's called Yatub Drum, and this is a song that, at least my understanding, is from Afghanistan. And it is a game that the kids absolutely love. Conceptually, it's really good for tom T, so that dotted quarter note, eighth note, low la, and there's an outer anacrusis in there, which honestly I don't really touch much, but we discuss it, not necessarily name it, but that's a story for another time. But it goes like this. Yeah, toop daram, yeah, toop daram, yeah, toop daram, yeah, toop daram, yekto se lubere, gagali lubere, gagali lubere, gagali lubere. And there's a few different ways this goes. So this is the game that I originally learned. So all the kids are in a circle and we pass the ball to the beat during the first part of the song. So all the way up through yekto se lubere or loho bere. And they're passing the ball to the beat. And then at that point, we have the people around the circle. There's someone in the middle. Basically, their job is to not get hit by the ball. And then during the during that part, everyone in the circle is kind of throwing the ball. And it's kind of like Gaga ball rules, where if you miss, the person on the other side gets to grab it and try again until the fourth time through. So obviously don't do it that fast, but at that point, if the person in the middle does not win or does not get tagged out, they win. Now, I've also seen it where the Gelgel part keeps going until the person in the middle is out. I think that is more accurate. I don't do it that way just because it will go forever unless people get turns in my classroom. But whatever works well for you works great. This is a great one. It translates to roughly, oh, I have the ball, 1, 2, 3, roll it away. It's great. I love it. Super easy. And and my fifth and sixth graders love it. I always keep it for middle school. As much as my fourth graders try to get me to do something extra special, I always keep that one in my back pocket because the kids love it. Shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about what do you do or what I do in an ensemble setting. So I want to clarify and kind of give this as a disclaimer as this is my first year teaching choirs and student teaching. So I am doing a lot of trial by error. And I've learned some cool things, and I've learned some things that just don't go well, at least don't work well in my current teaching situation. So when it comes to having students sing confidently, I always want to give them a quick win. So when we started the year, all 50 or so of my sixth graders came into this room having never been in choir before, and knowing full well that I have never taught a sixth grade choir. So the very first day, I wanted them to be singing, but also getting them to sing in parts. So the way that I did that is first, we really didn't do any reading the first day. As much as I love having the students be able to read, I wanted to, my main focus was just getting them to make music together. Kind of going on that is I wanted to simplify it so that it was a really super simple, quick win. And the way I did this was doing a round. I can't remember which round I picked. It was one from the 150 round book, the pink one. But it was super simple. It was one of those that had a little bit more, they were a little trickier because I didn't want it to sound babyish, but I knew that as soon as we learned it and then I had them layer it on top of each other, singing it around, they would be hooked. And watching these kids, their eyes just grow as they were able to see how by layering around on top of each other, you're actually creating harmony and you're actually singing in parts and you're actually creating this brand new experience, or at least in that specific case, they loved it. We got that quick win, and that really allowed me to get some buy-in, at least for the next few weeks. And I was able to keep coming up with new ideas to keep that buy-in so that we would have my singers feel confident when they're singing and feel like there was an end goal in mind. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the male voice in a choral setting in an episode about singer confidence. So this is one of those things where when I reflect on my own middle school experience, I was always the kid that was, singing the high soprano part, and I had a rough vocal transition. For the longest time, my range was incredibly small. I couldn't sing it up an octave. I couldn't sing it down an octave. It was just really rough, to the point where I would basically all but written off singing forever. And I was going to be a band director because I didn't want to ever have to sing again. So there are a few things that I do in especially my choral setting, but pretty much any of my upper grades, to make sure that anyone who might be having a vocal transition is able to still feel like they can sing confidently. First of all, if I notice that there is a student that is really already trying to shift octaves, I will occasionally shift octaves myself. So I typically sing up in my head voice. I have a very strong upper range, so I typically will sing in the octaves with my students. But if I know that there are students that are trying to flip down, especially if they're trying to flip down because they just don't have that upper register, I will use my lower register as well to help make it less obvious that it's just one kid singing down an octave, but also to model that is another way of singing, and that's fine. And also to help them, with some ear training down at that octave. Beyond that, I'm also aware, I try to make it really like a big deal where I set the key in my classes and in my lessons so that they're at an appropriate range, so that nobody's have to sing too high or too low, and that everyone is kind of in their optimal range. To end this episode, I want to give a potentially controversial view. For me, knowing that we as music teachers often work under the constraints of scheduling and rotations and all these other things. Obviously, in an ideal world, we would cover all of our standards and the students would be creating and singing and dancing and playing all time through all the standards. But that just isn't necessarily the reality all of the time, especially as we kind of dig our way out of this mess that COVID caused. for me, I would feel so much better as an educator if my students were able to leave my classroom singing, even if they didn't get all of the standards. And I'm not saying we should make our classrooms only vocally based, but I think it is important for us to realize that singing is an innately musical thing, an innately human thing, because it is the instrument that most of us have with us all the time. And again, there's something to be said about instrumental and accessibility for students that might not necessarily use their voices in the way that most of us do. But I would much rather, in those situations, differentiate and ensure that they are able to access the music in a way that works for them than to kind of shove curriculum down the throats of our kids, because that's just not going to help. That's not going to be joyful. And that's not going to increase confidence, because we're all going to be frustrated because we're not going to be moving as quick as we need to, because there's always more to teach. I know this episode is a little scatterbrained and a little kind of off the cuff, but I really think that whatever we can do as early as we can do, whatever our situation lends itself to get the kids singing earlier and more often and in more unique situations, not just the same thing, singing alone or singing with others or singing with an accompaniment, but allowing them to understand how all of those fit together and how all of those feels in their voice. The earlier we can do that, the better. And then for those opportunities where we don't really have the chance to change what has happened in the past, to try to make the best out of it and to do so in a way that keeps the joy in music making. Because let's be honest, nobody's going to sing loud and proud if they don't want to be there and they're just waiting for the bell to ring. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of That Music Podcast. Links to everything that we mentioned today will be in the show notes wherever you're listening to. And hopefully we'll have our YouTube videos back. If you are watching on YouTube, we'll have some video content soon as we can get our technology back up and running. If you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean the world to us if you were to leave a review wherever you are watching, and to check us out over on Instagram at That Music Teacher. We'd love to connect with you, and we would love to continue this conversation about elementary music and singer confidence online. We love being able to connect with y'all. So thank you so much for listening. And in case nobody has told you lately, thank you so much for making a difference in the lives of the students that you teach.